that cave. You couldn't get away quickly. You had to. It took a lot of work to get in and out. I went there to be helpless, not and vulnerable, not to be invulnerable and safe.
But did you feel like it was? You didn't feel like it was safe. Did you feel like being vulnerable that way increased the chances you would have an encounter?
Yes, I did feel that. I felt it. It did. I felt it. It would increase the chances, and it did. Not in the cave, but in the rest, in the more larger context of my life. The more I placed myself in vulnerable situations, the more they showed up. Not in those situations, because frankly, I mean, they must have been. They're very sensitive beings, and my experience of them is they might not have been willing to do that for fear it would simply scare me to death. But they waited, and when I was less vulnerable, then they showed up.
So I think we've had these long conversations over the years, and one of the things that comes up a lot is the linking of terror and ecstasy, or what we might call the demonic and the angelic in these experiences. And this is sort of lesson 101 in the study of religion, is that the sacred is not the good. People, when people think of God, or when they think of the sacred, they think of the good, as in the morally good. And that's actually not how it plays out in history at all. To just take something simple, if you look at God in the Bible, you don't want to get close to God. You certainly don't want to see God face to face, and whatever you want to do, you don't want to touch God, because you're dead if you touch God. So God is the sacred in these ancient religions. You can think of it more like a nuclear reactor that you can't get too close to. And so what a temple is, it's not a place you go and sing hymns and feel good about yourself and go home and look at kitten posters on the wall. The temple is like a nuclear reactor. It protects you from the sacred. It's what controls the sacred, so that you can sort of dribble it into the human community a little. And so when you get to the abduction literature, or the psychedelic literature for that matter, this, of course, is exactly what you see. You see people being ripped to shreds and being terrified and being in ecstasy all at the same time, because what seems to be happening is their sense of self, their body-brain containers are being cracked open, and these other dimensions are flowing in. And this is what I think Whitley was getting at with this notion of initiation. These are really difficult processes for people to encounter. And the danger here, of course, is to confuse these negative and terrifying moments with a Christian notion of the demon. And this, of course, is what happens so often when modern people look at these accounts, is they see demons. And actually, what the ancients called the daimon wasn't a demon. It was something very sacred and very special, although also very tricky. You had to be careful about daimons. They were very much like the aliens or the greys of the abduction literature. So this gets us into the whole realm of the morality. Or do these have any kind of moral translation into our world, or they have their own agendas, and when we encounter them, we should put aside our own notions of what we learned in church or school or wherever we learned it. Honestly, I don't know a lot about the Book of Enoch. I know a little. If you could, can you clarify your question a bit? I can maybe answer it. I don't know. I mean, this is what we call the question of the canon. The question of the canon is why and when were certain books put in, say, the Bible or the Hebrew Bible or the Christian New Testament or the Quran or any other body of authoritative religious literature. What were the reasons that certain texts were put in and other texts were kept out? And those are largely political and historical questions. And we could talk about them, but it would take us far afield, I'm afraid. I think, though, there's a third class where the Book of Enoch is what we call the sort of intertestamental or apocryphal literature. These are texts that were actually not thrown out, but they weren't quite put in either. They kind of held this middle status of being authoritative, but not yet really authoritative. And I think when you think of something like the Bible, what you have to think about is about a 1,000-year period in which 50 or so texts are being written in completely different historical circumstances, and then you have communities later picking and choosing which of those texts to put in there to represent their own convictions and their own worldviews. So it's an amalgam of all kinds of things. And I think what you see in these modern religious experiences, the reason these are so subversive is that they don't fit into those canons very well. That's really the bottom line.
Okay, that is about our time. I just want to ask you one more sort of Oprah Winfrey-esque closer for all of you, which is in listening to each other tonight and or in your conversations just over the past few days, what have you learned from each other? And I guess start with Whitley and go down the line.
Well, I'm delighted to have met and listened to Dennis for the first time. And I am fascinated that he's fine despite all of this use of these incredibly intense substances. Well, I was once in a room in which people were smoking marijuana, and I was only there for a few minutes, but afterwards, for a week, I kept seeing myself passing in the street, and then we went to a party, and I complimented the hostess on the goldfish in her lampstands, and my wife just took me home and she said, "You realize, Whitley, that you're still high from having been in the room with Brian and his wife when they were smoking marijuana." I said, I probably should not do much in the way of drugs. I have a feeling I'm a little bit overhyped in that area. This is before any of the communion things happened. And so I always admire people who can do it and who can make something out of it and who can bring its message forth. What can I say about Jeff? Every time I'm with Jeff, I learn something new. I've heard the speech he gave this morning before, and I learned from it again. It clarifies the mind. I think it is the best thing that is now being said about the close encounter experience, the numinous and the supernatural, and I was very, very happy to be here and hear it again.
Yes, well, thank you, Whitley. I've either pulled the wool over your eyes or I am more or less functional, thank you. But really, it's been an honor to be able to appear with Whitley and with Jeffrey. When I was originally invited to come to this event by Jeremy, he asked me if I wanted to appear with Whitley Strieber, and I was one of those people. I'm ashamed to say that I had all the misconceptions about you. I said, isn't he the alien abduction guy? And Jeremy said, well, not really, though. He's really much deeper than that. So I believe the media false picture. And then I learned that you and Jeffrey had written this book together, Supernatural, and I knew Jeffrey from having gone down to Houston and addressed his class and sold some books and so on. And I said, well, I know Jeffrey is a solid guy. And if he and Whitley have written a book, that means Whitley must be also much more credible than he's portrayed. So I said, if you can invite Jeffrey and we'll all three do it, then I'll definitely come to this event. And Jeremy did, and here we are. And then I read Supernatural also, and sort of Jeffrey sent me a copy, and so here we are, and that was kind of a preparation for it. And I read it, and I was very, very impressed, and I came away thinking these people are actually getting close to, I don't know if they'll never be the explanatory paradigm, but they are getting close to a model or an understanding of this paranormality that makes sense to me and explains a lot. So, I think, that's the other thing about Whitley as I learned more about him, and as Jeffrey explained how he was, and it was like my respect for him just was enormously boosted because because what I learned is he's extremely honest about these experiences. He relates honestly what happens to him, what he has experienced, and I now believe that. I wasn't so sure before, but I believe that, and more than that, he's honest enough to say he doesn't pretend to have the answers. So he is put in the category of, he's a curious monkey like the rest of us, and that's another term for a scientist, somebody who knows enough to know that they don't know everything there is to know, and honest enough to continue to ask questions, and that's what he's done. And so, good for you. You've spent your life on this. And Jeffrey, well, what can we say? He's just a brilliant scholar, and he can bring the context to this, from his tremendous familiarity with the myth and religions and the origins of these things, and there's not too many contemporary philosophers of comparative religions that have chosen modern myths and superheroes and all this, but it's true. That is the myth of our time. So I think it takes courage and also a certain insight into the dynamics of our culture to realize that this is not stuff to be dismissed. It shows up in comic books and young people like it, but there's much more to it than that, and in the movies and so on. So that's my impression. I'm very happy to be here and participate in this. I thank all of you.
So both men have really spoken to what I find so fascinating about this conversation. I've known Dennis for a number of years. Jerry and Linda Patchen invited him down to Houston, and we spent some time together and read each other. And I've worked with Whitley over the years, but never heard them together. The ufology world is one thing. The psychedelic counterculture is another thing, and they're both taboo. So when you put them together, it's like taboo, and I guess that was really interesting for me. Yeah, and to see what they have in common and how they actually are connected. To me, that was the real takeaway for today: is these deep kind of currents that connect these worlds and these types of experiences.
Okay. Thank you. Whitley Strieber, Dennis McKenna, Jeff Kripal. Much appreciated.